Well, it's lovely to be out on such a sunny evening in Edinburgh, but it's a shame that we have to be out tonight protesting against the two-child cap and the rate clause, well more than a year since Alison Thewlis, my colleague at Westminster, first spotted it in the small print of a Tory budget.
Very glad to see such a huge demonstration today and so many people still coming along 1 year after the rate clause came into force to show their opposition to this vile and despicable policy. The UK government have never been able to justify this policy, and we saw that this week with Esther McVeigh's pathetic attempts to say that the rate clause was somehow double support for women and that gives them some kind of chance to talk about the most appalling and disturbing experience of their life.
As you can see behind me, we're at the very beginning of the All Under One Banner rally. You can obviously hear the pipers behind me as events are about to kick off.
It's time to aim high, look resolutely outwards, and never, ever accept second best. Above all, it's time to believe that we can. We can build that better country we know is possible. And friends, we will.
If you enjoy watching our programmes, please help us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster by signing up to become a Broadcasting Scotland supporter.
Closing branches without consultation, such as Santander in the South Scotland region.
Minister Kate Forbes.
I'm sorry to be answering this question again because I remain deeply concerned at the scale of branch closures across Scotland, concerns that will be shared by communities, vulnerable members of our societies and small businesses that rely on access to local banking services, particularly in rural areas like that represented by Claudia Beamish. I appreciate that banks must operate on a commercial basis. However, Santander and other banks must take into account the needs of all customers, and digital should never be exclusive and the only means by which customers can engage with their banks.
Claudia Beamish.
I thank the Minister for that answer, and it is indeed very interesting the point she raised. I do agree with her on that, but what steps can the Scottish Government take to ensure that there is a presence on our high streets of banking? And that's very important, and also it's important to make sure that there are measures that the Scottish Government should be able to take to make it easier for credit unions to have a high street presence as well.
Minister.
I thank the member for that question. Of course, bearing in mind that banking is a reserved area, we still appreciate that the impact on communities is not reserved. Just yesterday I had a meeting with Which, who have done a lot of research in this area, and also with Unite the Union to look at the impact that branch closures are having on communities and on the employees as well. In terms of steps that the Scottish Government has taken, we meet regularly with banks themselves to make clear our disappointment with the scale of closures and the lack of consultation with communities in many cases, but also looking at alternatives. One of those alternatives are credit unions, and it's worth noting that there is a much higher level of the Scottish population enrolled in a credit union at 7.3% than elsewhere in the UK. In November, we launched a campaign to encourage people to sign up to credit unions, and have also previously funded junior saver schemes, and the First Minister has written to employers to look at partnering with credit unions, as well as engaging with the Post Office too.
Jackie Bailey.
No consultation in advance, just a letter telling long-standing members of the Santander branch in Helensburgh that they need to travel 40 miles for their nearest bank branch. The Minister said that she regularly meets with some of these banks. Has she met with Santander? Will she seek a meeting with them specifically to encourage them to reconsider the extent of their closures?
Minister.
I would happily meet with Santander. I do meet with them regularly and make clear my disappointment in these areas. And as somebody who knows well the impact, particularly in rural communities, I recognise the huge impact. Scottish Government officials are currently in contact with Santander and will continue to engage with the bank. Again, we do all that we can with the powers that we have to make clear our displeasure. But at the end of the day, when it comes to regulation, that is a reserved matter.
Question number 2, Neil Findlay.
To ask the Scottish Government what action it has taken to alleviate the reported parking problems at St John's Hospital.
Cabinet Secretary Jean Freeman.
Scottish Government health officials met with NHS Lothian yesterday. The board takes this matter seriously and has taken steps to manage availability of spaces and to provide alternatives to on-site parking, along with alternative forms of transport. The board remains committed to ongoing engagement with patients, staff, visitors and neighbours to understand and address parking-related issues.
Neil Findlay.
Hundreds of patients and staff and local residents have contacted me about the parking chaos in and around St John's Hospital. I've asked NHS Lothian officials to attend a public meeting so that they can hear ideas from patients, staff and residents about how these problems can be resolved. But so far they have refused to attend such a meeting. Surely NHS Lothian have to be accountable for their actions. And will the Minister instruct them to come to a public meeting in Livingston to hear ideas from patients and those who use the area in and around the hospital about how we can resolve these problems?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Of course, 66% of spaces are available to staff. The board has reconfigured some of those spaces that are available to increase the number of spaces available to patients in order to ensure that they are not late for appointments, and they've received very positive feedback for that. The board advises me that they've received a very small number of complaints from neighbours, around 2 to 4 complaints which have been dealt with directly. The board does engage with staff through the local partnership forum, which of course in our NHS is a very successful way of engaging with staff across an entire health board and in a particular site, and reaching shared solutions to matters. And they continue to engage with staff through that partnership forum as they look to plan the new elective centre, which will of course be based at St John's. It is not for me to instruct the board in this matter. It is for me to make clear to boards, to this board and to others, that I expect them to engage effectively and continuously with the local community, neighbours, with staff, with patients and with others. They have done some work to ensure a corporate discount scheme in terms of public transport, and they've taken on a number of suggestions that have come to them from patients and staff through the work that they've undertaken. Mr Findlay may feel that is inadequate, but from my purposes, as I said before, it's not for me to instruct the board exactly how they do these matters. I could see criticism coming my way if I did precisely that, probably from those very benches. But it is for me to ensure that the board engages constructively, and I will continue to ensure that they do that.
Question number 3, Lewis Macdonald.
To ask the Scottish Government when it plans to consult on setting a target for all homes to have at least a C energy performance certificate rating.
Minister Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government has already consulted on whether all homes should have to meet at least an Energy Performance Certificate Band C rating. We consulted on this proposal last summer following the launch of our Energy Efficient Scotland route map and welcome the ongoing cross-party support for this ambition. An analysis of the responses received was published on the 22nd of November and is available on the Scottish Government's website.
Lewis Macdonald.
Thank you very much. The Minister will know that Paul Wheelhouse in November made a further commitment, and that in answer to a question only on the 31st of January, he said that, that the Government would consult in March, seeking views on whether Energy Efficient Scotland could be accelerated and how the risks of doing that could be overcome. In that context, would the Minister recognise that these certificates are currently calculated on the basis of cost efficiency, which fails to take into account the cost disadvantages of rural communities which are off the gas grid? And will he consider taking the opportunity to base future ratings on kilowatts of energy used per square metre, so that they are measuring carbon emissions rather than cost to consumers?
Kevin Stewart.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. As Mr Macdonald pointed out, Mr Wheelhouse, in answer to Tom Arthur on the 31st of January, gave some detail around about how we will progress on these issues. Mr Wheelhouse said that we will set out in more detail about the suite of legislation the Scottish Government will bring forward to deliver on the Energy Efficiency Scotland pipeline. And we will do so in the very near future. Obviously, we will look at concerns right across the board, urban and rural. And as Mr Macdonald and others in the Chamber are probably well aware, we spend more in energy efficiency on rural areas per head of population than we do in urban, and will continue to do so.
And Gillian Martin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And on that note, can I ask the Minister what solutions the Government is considering to assist those in rural areas who have limited choice in heating fuel and often have harder to heat properties?
Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As I said to Mr Macdonald, we're committed to continuing to spend more per head on energy efficiency in remote rural areas where we know that installation and labour costs are higher. Since 2013-14, our remote and rural areas have received almost £64 million in investment through our home energy efficiency programmes. And this funding is distributed based on assessment of need, which means remote areas receive more money per head of population to tackle fuel poverty. For example, the maximum grant available to households in very remote rural areas through the HEAPS area base scheme has risen since 2013 to £9,000. And that's compared with a maximum grant of £7,500 elsewhere in Scotland. We have reviewed our Warmer Homes Scotland programme, our National Fuel Poverty Scheme, to see how it can better support those in rural communities. And Ms Martin and others can be assured that we will continue to do all of that work.
And Alexander Burnett.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And noting my register of interest in property, I would point out that there is an increasing frustration in the housing sector about the lack of guidance from the Scottish Government on the proposed EPC regulations due to come into force in 14 months. Now, details were supposed to be published early this year, but none have been forthcoming. So does the Minister understand the issues the lack of details at this late stage creates? And can he clarify exactly when this information will be available?
Minister.
Presiding Officer, we're going through a very rigorous process in making sure that we get all of this absolutely right. We want to ensure that companies in Scotland, including companies like the one that Mr Burnett owns, benefit from our energy efficiency programme, and that we do our very best for the people of Scotland. We want to grow supply chains here and make sure that we have the labour and skills to develop energy efficiency properly. I realise that there are people out there who want us to move further and faster. What we will do, Presiding Officer, is do this right.
Question number 4, Mark Griffin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to reports of the proposed closure of the Cumbernauld Village Surgery.
Cabinet Secretary Jean Freeman.
Thank you. We are aware of the situation at this branch practice, and NHS Lanarkshire have been in discussions with the practice about options for the future. The Board will ensure, as it is required to do, that a primary care service continues to be made available to all patients and that patient safety is maintained at all times. My understanding is that the practice has recently closed a consultation with 2 options available for consultation, but as yet no decisions have been taken.
Mark Griffin.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her answer. If this proposed closure does go ahead, patients will go from a service on their doorstep to a 5-mile bus trip, not a journey any of us would want to undertake when we're ill. Now, given previous interventions by health boards to directly run GP surgeries, in the event of a closure, will the Cabinet Secretary ask NHS Lanarkshire to step in and protect this vital service, which my constituents in Cumbernauld Village depend on?
Cabinet Secretary.
I completely appreciate both the sentiment that Mr Griffith is expressing and the concerns of local residents who use this particular practice about what may happen. We will ensure in our discussions with the Health Board and in the Health Board's discussion with those with the practice itself, that primary care continues to be available and continues to be accessible. At this point, it would be wrong of me to leap to conclusions until I see what the GP partners want to do as a consequence of their consultation and the further discussions that they have with the Health Board. But I can assure the member that I and my officials will keep in close contact with this and do all that we can to ensure that that primary care service of the highest quality remains available and remains accessible to patients in the area it serves.
And Richard Lyle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary confirm the increase in funding to frontline health services and explain what this will mean for GP practices across Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, as Mr Lyle will know, we have in the budget a significant increase to our frontline services. We are moving very fast towards our overall aim of over 50% of all health funding being directed towards frontline services. There is a significant investment in primary care and primary care reform, and of course in the GP contract, which is an essential part of that, and significant additional investment from my portfolio area to local government for health and social care partnership and those integration services. I'm very happy to give the member the specific numbers for his area of interest, and indeed to provide that to other members should they wish. But what is absolutely clear is that resourcing is significant in this area, and we have the plans, we have the commitment, and we now need to carry on and further the delivery of our ambitions.
Question number 5, James Dornan.
To ask the Scottish Government what financial support it has provided for mental health services in the current parliamentary session.
Minister Claire Hawkey.
In 2019-2020, the Scottish Government will increase direct investment in mental health by £27 million, and this will take overall funding for mental health to £1.1 billion. Mental health expenditure over the 4 years since 2016-17 will amount to £4 billion. And as Mr Dornan is aware, mental health is a priority for this government, evidenced by specifically appointing a Minister for Mental Health and significant investment in the Scottish Government Mental Health Strategy, progress in which I updated Parliament last year, and there is a commitment to do so annually.
James Dornan.
Thank you. Would the Minister agree with me that proposals in the draft budget to invest an additional £250 million over the next 5 years to improve mental health outcomes for children and young people is a step in the right direction? But would the Minister also agree with me that it's deeply disappointing that the Liberal Democrats, who have championed extra funding for mental health services over the last few years, will not support this important investment because of their constitutional obsession?
Claire Hawkey.
I would agree with James Dornan. Yes, sir, £250 million investment will support the ambitions set out in the programme for government to build on the principles of early intervention and radically change what we do to ensure care and support is available as close to children, young people and their families as possible. The Better Mental Health Delivery Plan, published in December, which includes a number of actions to reform children and young people's mental health and boards, will be expected to have in place by April improvement plans with clear milestones to be achieved over the next 2 years. But, Presiding Officer, while the Liberal Democrats talk about mental health and the need to invest in it and expand services, it's worth remembering that last week they voted against a budget which would deliver significant investment in mental health care. It appears the Liberal Democrats might talk the talk, but when they actually have the opportunity to support the Scottish Government in improving mental health services, they refuse to do so.
Question number 6, John Mason.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what consideration it has given to increasing pay for local councillors.
Minister Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. A Scottish statutory instrument to increase the level of remuneration payable to local authority councillors by 2.8% with effect from the 1st of April this year was laid before the Parliament on the 1st of February.
John Mason.
I thank the Minister for that answer. MPs are paid some £77,000, we get £62,000 and councillors get £17,000. It does seem a little bit uneven, given that I consider many councillors work just as hard, certainly as some MPs that I know. Would the Minister not agree with that?
Minister.
Presiding Officer, Mr Mason has pointed out the basic salary of councillors. As he is well aware, there is also special responsibility allowances above that in many cases. The Independent Scottish Local Authorities Remuneration Committee considered in 2005 whether councillors' pay should be comparable to that of MSPs, but concluded that it should not, because the differences between the two roles are more significant than there are similarities, with MSPs, of course, being legislators with a national role, whereas councillors are responsible for local services. The committee itself revisited the issue again in 2010, and they came to exactly the same conclusion. As a former councillor myself, I very much appreciate the contribution and the hard work of councillors right across the country, but I'm not personally persuaded that recalling the Remuneration Committee at this point would lead to a different conclusion.
Question number 7, Joan McAlpine.
To ask the Scottish Government when it last met the Tenant Farming Commissioner.
Cabinet Secretary Fergus Ewing.
The Scottish Government officials last met with the Tenant Farming Commissioner on Thursday, the 24th of January, at his Tenant Farming Advisory Forum.
Joan McAlpine.
Thank you. As the Cabinet Secretary will be aware, the conduct of some land agent has caused concern for many. Can he advise me on what progress has been made in creating a code of conduct for individuals providing land agent services as the Land Reform Act provided for?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, the member raises an important issue. The Tenant Farming Commissioner's report on the operation of landlord and tenant farming agents was published in May 18, and I welcomed the report's findings. And this highlighted, Presiding Officer, that the majority of landlords and their tenant farmers are content with their relationship, but for some individuals there are still issues. So the Tenant Farming Commissioner is currently working with the relevant professional bodies on producing a code of practice for land agents, which will include the standards expected of an agent and how to complain if an agent fails to meet those standards.
Thank you very much, and I think that concludes general questions. We're going to turn now to First Minister's questions, and I call question number 1, Jackson Carlow.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Many of us have been hearing from ordinary Scots this week who are deeply alarmed about the SNP plans to charge them for taking their own car to work. Here's what one young man had to say in an email. I am a young apprentice from South Lanarkshire. I know £2 a day doesn't seem like much, but this is often apprenticeship wage is a lot, while many in a similar age group are paying rent, council tax, road tax and other utility bills, and some also trying to save for their futures. This is a tax that will hit the lowest and least representative employment groups in the country. Let me make this promise to thousands of others like him across Scotland. Scottish Conservatives, all of us here, will oppose a workplace parking levy. Will the Deputy First Minister make him the same pledge?
Deputy First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I don't think it will come as a surprise to anybody that in a parliament where the government does not command an overall majority, we have got to talk to and reach agreement with other parties about specific issues. And of course, what we found in this budget process was the Conservative Party were spectacularly absent from those discussions. So they have no right to come here today and complain about the agreements that we have to arrive at. It's important that Parliament is clear about what is proposed here. This is an agreement to bring forward an amendment to the Transport Bill that will enable local authorities to exercise a judgment as to whether they wish to apply a workplace parking levy. The decision will be up to local authorities to take that decision. It is an example of localism in practice, and I would have thought the Conservatives would have welcomed that.
Jackson Carlow.
So almost unbelievably, the short answer is no. Mr Swinney will not be backing these people or thousands of others of workers like them. What an absolute disgrace. Presiding officer, at yesterday's Finance Committee, Derek Mackay even admitted he hadn't done any economic analysis of the cost of a workplace parking levy. But we have. A £400 annual charge would be equivalent to increasing the basic rate of a tax paid by a worker on the real living wage from 20 pence in the pound to 30 pence in the pound. So can the Deputy First Minister tell us, when he promised not to increase the basic rate of income tax before the last election, did he imagine he'd be voting to thump those same workers with a new levy equivalent to a tax hike of 10 pence in the pound?
Deputy First Minister.
It's very important, Presiding Officer, that we remain focused on what is actually proposed here. And what is actually proposed here is the awarding to local authorities of a power to apply a workplace parking levy if they judge that to be the appropriate thing to do, and once they have made the appropriate assessments of such a commitment. And I cited this as an example of localism quite deliberately, because in 2017, Ruth Davidson said, "Our manifesto for the council elections was published a couple of weeks back. It spells out a thorough and clear vision. At its heart is a case for localism." So the Conservatives have been full-scale behind empowering local authorities. If that wasn't enough, Graham Simpson, the local government spokesman of the Tories, said, "We believe that decisions should be taken as locally as possible and that power should lie with politicians elected as locally as possible." He went on, "We need to empower councils and give them a renewed sense of meaning and purpose." Now, if that wasn't enough for Jackson Carlaw, in 2016, the First Minister received a letter from 4 Conservatives urging her to re-empower councils, to take decisions that they could think about themselves. The first author of the letter was Murdo Fraser. The second was Liz Smith. The third was Maurice Golden. And Parliament will not be surprised. The final one of the quartet was Jackson Carlaw.
Jackson Carlaw.
Presiding officer.
Order, please. Order,
Presiding
please.
officer, this isn't Blue Peter, and one pathetic excuse that you made up earlier ain't going to wash it. Listen, for the last 12 years, I've marvelled at Mr Swinney and the full theatrical performance we get from him when the SNP are in real trouble. Out he comes swinging. But the fact of the matter is, you know, the SNP council leader in Edinburgh Council this morning said it would be a missed opportunity if employees did not have to pay the levy. Mr Swinney may support charging low-paid workers. Happily, some of his colleagues are made of sterner stuff. Just 2 months ago, speaking in Parliament, his colleague Richard Lyle made his opposition plain. He said, "No, I am not for your parking charge levy, and I speak on behalf of thousands of motorists who've been taxed enough." Well said, Mr Lyle. He's prepared to stand up for hard-pressed Scottish workers. Why isn't John Swinney?
Deputy First Minister.
As Jackson Carlaw goes purple-faced, it's a bit rich to accuse me of theatrical performances. Presiding officer, the Conservatives have fought the 2016 and 2017 elections on a commitment to empower local authorities. The Scottish Government, when the Conservatives would play absolutely no part in the process of setting a budget for this Parliament, cannot then come along and complain about the fact that this government, in agreement with the Green Party, has been prepared to re-empower local authorities. That, Mr Carlaw, is rank hypocrisy even from you. But, presiding officer, what the Conservatives have to be reminded about is that if we had listened to them on the budget, if we hadn't reached an agreement with the Greens, we would have had to contemplate, if we'd followed the Conservatives, taking £500 million out of the budget of the Scottish Parliament, punishing families, punishing public services, reducing staff numbers. This government wouldn't count it as that, but that's what the Tories wanted to inflict on Scotland.
Jackson Carlo.
You know, Mr Swinney says we've no credibility demanding tax cuts and higher spending. He says the Tories have no credibility in the economy. It's a Tory Chancellor, Philip Hammond, who wrote the cheques you're spending, Mr Swinney. The additional £148 million Derek Mackay concealed from Parliament the week before he announced his budget. And when you've spent it to settle the mess you're making of teachers' pay, I hope you'll send him a thank you note for bailing you out of your own problem. Presiding officer, it's sad to see Mr Swinney defend things in which he clearly does not believe. It's sad to see him defend a rise in the basic rate of income tax when he once said, and I quote, "A tax rise would be a punishment for low-income workers." It's sad to see him defend an inflation-busting rise in the council tax when he and the First Minister stood in a manifesto promise in 2016 not to do so. And it's sad to see him now demand that ordinary people be charged for driving to work when once, as the champion of Middle Scotland, the gnat you could trust, he claimed to be the voice of enterprise. Isn't it time he admitted he got this wrong? Come on, man, simply drop this unwanted and unworkable plan. And if you don't, won't it be clear to everyone, despite trying to spin it today, that tens of thousands of Scottish workers are to be fleeced for hundreds of pounds a year just because Derek Mackay, John Swinney and Nicola Sturgeon can't say no to 6 dismal Green MSPs?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, if that wasn't an audition for the next pantomime in Glasgow, I have no idea what it was. After all these weeks of rehearsing while his boss is away, I would have thought Jackson Carlo could have come up with something slightly more considered than that. I take it from that rant that Jackson Carlo is not in any way supportive of resolving the teachers' pay claim that I'm trying very hard to resolve. I take it from that Jackson Carlo wants to continue to inflict on the people of this country, by applying the tax cuts that he wants to apply in the budget, a cut in public spending of £500 million, which would reduce the number of nurses in our hospitals by nearly 20,000. Is that what Jackson Carlo is seriously trying to argue for? Jackson Carlo has been found out today. He goes around the country arguing for more powers for local government, and when we deliver them, he comes here in an act of rank hypocrisy and criticises them. The people of Scotland can see through the hypocrisy of the Tories. They can see what the Tories are about. Their spots have never changed. They want to cut public spending, and they'll take the hypocritical way of doing it.
Question number 2, Richard Leonard.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Deputy First Minister tell this chamber when the government last met its A&E waiting times target?
Deputy First Minister.
As Richard Leonard will know, the performance on A&E waiting times has been a significant challenge within the health service. But within those waiting times, the performance within the A&E units in Scotland has been at the leading edge of the United Kingdom for 4 years. So there are challenges to be wrestled with. That is what the Health Secretary is focused on making sure is the case. But for 4 years, A&E units in Scotland have delivered the best performance in the United Kingdom.
Richard Leonard.
Well, that was a response but not an answer to the question I asked. In fact, the government's waiting time target of 95% has not been met since last August. A principal reason for that lamentable record is its failure to tackle the delayed discharge of patients. And don't just take my word for it. Tim Davison, the Chief Executive of NHS Lothian, wrote this just last week. For a hospital the size of the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh, the number of patients remaining in hospital when they do not need to be there is equivalent to 3 whole wards and is significantly impacting on our ability to manage the flow of patients through the hospital. It can impact on our ability to see and assess patients promptly. It delays access to a bed quickly within the agreed 4-hour target. It is contributing to short-notice cancellation of planned elective surgery. Presiding Officer, the previous Health Secretary promised to eradicate delayed discharge within a year. That was back in February 2015. So 4 years on, can the Deputy First Minister tell us when he believes his government will keep that promise and finally ensure that no one is left stuck in our hospitals when they don't need to be there?
Deputy First Minister.
I agree with the last point that Richard Leonard made, that it is important that people are only in hospital for the length of time that they should properly be in hospital. And the government is focused on trying to ensure that individuals are able to make that journey through hospital and out into the community as efficiently and as smoothly as they possibly can do. Those are our objectives. In the process, we are reducing the extent of delayed discharges. The delayed discharges are reducing within Scottish hospitals. And one of the things that's helping that process is the increased investment that Mr Mackay made available in the budget process to invest in health and social care integration at community level within Scotland. So, following the draft budget for 2019-20, we're increasing our package of direct investment in social care and integration to over £700 million, and that was central to the announcements that Mr Mackay made in the Stage 1 debate last Thursday. So there is an intense focus within government and within the health service to make sure that we build up health and social care capacity within our communities. That is exactly what the budget is designed to do, and it will assist us in reducing delayed discharges and making sure that individuals are able to make the smoothest journey possible through our health service, get the acute care when they require it, but the community care when it is necessary and appropriate for them to receive that.
Richard Leonard.
Well, John Swinney talks about health and social care integration. Well, this week we also learned that in Edinburgh, the Health and Social Care Partnership is facing over £19 million of cost pressures. How does that help? Presiding Officer, the scale of this problem is such that the number of people stuck in hospitals last year who did not need to be there would have filled the equivalent of every bed in Scotland's biggest hospital, the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, every day for 326 days. No wonder that this is having a significant impact on A&E waiting times and cancelled operations right across the country. And there is a human cost as well. Tim Davison went on to say that delayed discharge means, and I quote, disruption and distress to patients and families, a burden on patients and their carers or families, and reduces the quality of their experience. Remember, these are the words of the Chief Executive of the second largest health board in Scotland. So my question to the Deputy First Minister is this: when will this government start to listen? When will he take his responsibilities seriously? When will he snap out of his complacency and start to address the continuing problem of delayed discharge in Scotland?
Deputy First Minister.
I think the manner in how I've responded to Richard Leonard's question, I think, demonstrates that the government takes this deadly seriously. What are we doing to tackle delayed discharge? We are increasing the resources available to social care integration within the community. We are seeing in Edinburgh the the health board that Richard Leonard quoted there, in Edinburgh, we are seeing delayed discharges falling within the city of Edinburgh. We've put £160 million more into health and social care integration. Now, these are the judgments that the government is making within a very challenging financial environment. Why do we do that? Because we recognise, and this is where I completely accept the premise of Richard Leonard's question and also the comments from Mr Davidson, that it is better for individuals to be supported within the home or within a community setting than it is to be in a hospital when they do not need to be in that hospital. It's entirely appropriate for them to be in hospitals at particular stages, but we must support individuals through that journey, which is why Mr Mackay's budget, which is currently going through Parliament just now, will see an increase in the resources available for health and social care integration to over £700 million. It's why we continue to support the increase in resources and why we are confident that the effect of that investment and the joint working that is being provided for in health and social care integration will deliver the reduction in delayed discharges which we all want to see taking its course.
A number of constituency supplementaries. The first from Sandra White.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Deputy First Minister, you will be aware of the application to Glasgow City Council by the owners of the O2 ABC building in my constituency for complete, and I emphasise complete, demolition of this iconic building. I have many concerns regarding this. One of the concerns is the closeness and vicinity to the School of Art and what effect that may have on the investigation. I've written to the Scottish Fire and Rescue Services regarding that. But another concern is that the O2 building, whilst being iconic, was built in 1875, older than the Mackintosh School of Art, has not received the same publicity or the same importance placed upon it. Could I ask the First Minister or the Deputy First Minister if you agree with me that if, and I say if, the O2 cannot be saved in its entirety, we must do all we can to ensure that the facade of the historic building is absolutely saved?
Deputy First Minister.
President Officer, I realise the significance of the point that Sandra White raises about the O2 venue within her constituency. A building warrant application for the demolition of the venue was lodged with the City Council in Glasgow on the 31st of January. Obviously, each council must exercise their responsibilities individually, and in so doing, they must ensure that they comply with any legal requirement. Now, I'm not familiar with the listing arrangements of the facade of the venue that Sandra White has raised, but quite clearly there will be a perspective from Historic Environment Scotland that will need to be applied in those circumstances, and I will certainly make sure that Historic Environment Scotland are actively engaged in the consideration of this matter, as appropriately with the City Council in Glasgow.
And Gillian Martin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I ask the Deputy First Minister how the Government will hold Aberdeen Roads accountable for the delays incurred in the opening of the final section of the AWPR, when the Scottish Government has given contractors every opportunity to get a grip over this £750 million project and get it fully open to traffic?
Deputy First Minister.
Presiding Officer, Aberdeen Roads Limited will only be paid when sections of the road are open to traffic. In this way, they are incentivised to open the road at the earliest opportunity that it is safe to do so. Aberdeen Roads Limited still has work to do in providing fundamental assurances around the future maintenance of the River Don crossing that sufficiently protect the public purse. Once this commitment is received, there is no further barrier to opening the remainder of the road without delay. Over recent months, both Transport Scotland and the Transport Secretary have worked tirelessly with Aberdeen Roads Limited, and I'm pleased to say that not only is more than 85% of the road open, but the feedback from members of the public in the North East of Scotland has been overwhelmingly positive about this long overdue enhancement of the roads infrastructure of the North East of Scotland.
Stuart McWillan.
Thank you. The Deputy First Minister will be delighted with the outstanding news that the Texas Instruments plant in Greenock has been purchased by Dials Incorporated in a deal worth a reported £65 million, saving 300 high-value and highly skilled jobs. Does the Deputy First Minister agree with me that this investment and news has been hard won, congratulates everyone involved for making this deal happen, and commends all the staff at the plant who have continued to deliver despite the threat of redundancy hanging over their heads since 2016, and once again proves that Inverclyde is open for business?
Deputy First Minister.
President Officer, I do welcome the good news that has come from the former Texas Instruments plant and the acquisition by Deirdis. It's an important investment in the safeguarding of 300 jobs at the plant. It's been a accumulation of tremendous joint working between our enterprise agencies, the Government, Inverclyde Council and, of course, the workforce who have given extraordinary commitment to ensuring continuity. And we look forward to working with the company and taking forward the commitments that have been made to the workforce that are involved.
Question number 3, Patrick Harvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's been another bad day on Scotland's railway, with power and signal failures causing disruption in Glasgow. But this is a sadly typical experience. Over the weekend, passengers took to social media to share their experience of delays, cancellation, overcrowding, showing pictures of people with disabilities going without a seat, children sitting on the floor outside the train toilet, a passenger reported as having a panic attack. This isn't acceptable, it isn't safe, and it isn't what people in Scotland deserve from their railway. Can I ask what action the Government took following last weekend's appalling performance by ScotRail, and how long it will be before we have a rail service run in the public interest that meets the needs of the public?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, first of all, the Transport Secretary has made clear to Parliament already that the Government considers the current performance of ScotRail to be not acceptable. And for that reason, Transport Scotland issued formal notification on the 24th of December to ScotRail, requiring them to submit a remedial plan by the 18th of February. And the Government will, of course, hold ScotRail to that. We expect them to set out in that plan how they will address these performance issues to ensure that we can realise the benefits of the investment that's been made in new rolling stock and new infrastructure, which has been formidable in recent periods. Parliament is familiar with some of the operational challenges that have existed about the late delay of new rolling stock, which has affected the ability of the service to operate as we would have expected, and also the training, and because of that, the implications there has been for the training of staff to operate the railway safely. Now, Mr Harvey raises the specific examples of the weekend. ScotRail took a number of decisions to expand capacity on a number of routes because of the expectations about higher travelling numbers, particularly because of the rugby international match in Edinburgh. But quite clearly, there were a range of other issues which were of concern in the performance of ScotRail at the weekend. These are the very issues the Government expects ScotRail to address. That is why the Transport Secretary is in active dialogue with ScotRail at all times to improve that performance and to require them to comply with the remedial order that the Government has applied to ScotRail.
Patrick Harvey.
And I'm quite sure that Parliament will hold both ScotRail and the Government to account when the plan for remediation of these persistent failures is presented to us all. But look, there's clearly a need for wider structural change. Many of us would agree, for example, that Network Rail needs to be in the control of Scotland so that we can have a truly joined-up approach to these issues. But we cannot wait for that. That is no excuse for not taking action now. And 3 months ago, when many of these failures were already being regularly reported, the Government voted against using the breakpoint in the ScotRail franchise next year. Look, if the Government weren't convinced then, I think they should be convinced now that that option must remain on the table. Surely the Deputy First Minister won't rule that option out, because doing so would give Abellio a free pass to continue failing. Surely the Government must work on the assumption that a public sector bidder may be needed from next year. Will the Deputy First Minister tell the Chamber what progress is being made on the urgently needed preparation for a public rail operator that will operate the railways in the public interest?
Deputy First Minister.
I think that there's elements of Patrick Harvey's question which are more straightforward than others. On the point about devolution of responsibilities around Network Rail, I'm in entire agreement with him. I think it makes eminent common sense for that to be the case, because it would allow us to take forward the cooperation that exists within the ScotRail Alliance to a much deeper level of actual integration. And I think that there is, to me, there is a, politics aside, a common sense approach to that to be taken forward. On the issue of the application of a break clause in 2020, if there was to be a situation which arose where there was to be, if an operator of last resort was to replace ScotRail in 2020, that can only be a temporary measure. And under the current United Kingdom legislation, the requirement to tender the franchise would still remain, which then opens up the possibility, which we have now secured as a government, to bring forward a competitive public sector bid in that context. Now, development work is underway about how to advance the concept of a competitive public sector bid. That work has been taken forward by the Transport Secretary in dialogue with David McBrain Limited, who we've invited to take forward some of that work. I'm sure the Transport Secretary in due course, if he's not been already answering questions on this subject, will update Parliament on all of these questions. But the Government believes, fundamentally, we have got to have an efficient public rail network that meets the needs of individuals within Scotland, that acts in the public interest, that delivers services that members of the public are looking for. That's what our immediate short-term action is focused on achieving, and it's why we're open to developing a competitive public sector bid within the context of the existing United Kingdom legislation within which we have to operate.
We have some further supplementaries. The first from Mike Rumbles.
Will the Scottish Government civil servants be giving badly needed assistance to John Finney in drafting his workplace parking levy amendment to the Transport Bill? Because it's obvious from his public comments earlier this week that he hasn't a clue as to how he wants it to actually operate.
Deputy First Minister.
That's obviously, I understand that Mr Finney has asked, and the Rural Economy Committee has agreed, to take further evidence on this particular issue, and obviously the Government will contribute to that process. As we look at the drafting of amendments, of course the Government will be actively engaged in that process because we agreed to that with the Green Party. But I am a little bit surprised, well, am I a little bit surprised at Mr Rumble's line of argument, because when the provisions for a workplace parking levy were introduced by the Labour Party in the UK Transport Act in 2000, which gave enabling powers to English councils to introduce workplace parking levies, those measures were supported, surprise, surprise, by Liberal Democrat MPs. So it's just another example of saying one thing in one place and another thing in another place.
Linda Fabiani.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I wish to raise the case of the young son of a constituent. This wee lad's medical condition has been deemed appropriate for cannabis-based treatment, and he has been offered Epidiolex by his medical team. That was some 4 weeks ago, but no treatment has yet commenced, and no prospect given to the family of a start date. Meanwhile, the child's condition continues to deteriorate. Can the Deputy First Minister advise as to the clinical procedure once Epidiolex is agreed as appropriate, and investigate this delay?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, I'll ask the Health Secretary this afternoon to contact NHS Lanarkshire and establish all of the detail in this case. If there is a way in which we can address the very real and legitimate issues that Linda Fabiani has raised in Parliament today immediately, we will do so. And I will ask the Health Secretary to update Linda Fabiani by the close of business this afternoon.
Ross Greer.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. 51 of Scotland's most precious places for wildlife are protected as Ramsar sites. Recent guidance from the Scottish Government appears to downgrade the protection given to many of these sites, including Cool Links in the Highlands and Loch Lomond in my region. This contradicts the Environment Secretary's very welcome commitment made to Parliament last year. So could the Deputy First Minister confirm if this recent guidance will be withdrawn and corrected, and that all Ramsar sites in Scotland will continue to be given the same level of protection as designated Natura sites, as is the case in the rest of the UK?
First Minister.
The Ramsar sites are protected in Scotland by either the Natura regulations or by the designation as sites of special scientific interest. I think it's very clear that that affords to these sites the highest level of environmental protection. But if there are specific issues that Mr Greer is concerned about in that respect, I will ask the Environment Secretary to correspond with him to address any particular issues that are raised in relation to the approach to designation, because it is important and the Government is absolutely committed to fulfilling the commitments and obligations that are incumbent on us in relation to the commitments around Ramsar sites and to ensure that those are fulfilled in all of the actions that we take.
Question number 4, Christine Graham.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Deputy First Minister what the Scottish Government's position is on whether learning to play a musical instrument should be a core subject in schools.
Deputy First Minister.
Presiding Officer, music as one of the expressive arts is an essential part of the broad general education under Curriculum for Excellence. This includes class music lessons, including when an instrument is taught on a whole class basis. An education authority may charge fees for the provision of instrumental tuition which is discretionary over and above this. It is for local authorities to decide how to provide instrumental music tuition, depending on local circumstances, priorities and traditions. In taking these decisions, local authorities should consider the undoubted benefits that learning a musical instrument can have on well-being and on attainment.
Christine Graham.
I thank the Deputy First Minister for his answer. That said, does he share my concern that Labour-led Midlothian Council is the only council in Scotland proposing to axe all music tuition for pupils below S4, at the same time paying out £10 million a year in interest payments from the education budget because of Labour's punitive PFI projects, with the result that if you want to play, you'll have to pay privately. Music for the few, not the many. And does the DFM agree with me that it's no wonder my constituents and I will be demonstrating against these cuts outside Midlothian Council HQ this Tuesday, when one song we won't be singing certainly is to keep the red flag flying there?
Deputy First Minister.
Presiding Officer, in my earlier answer, I stressed the importance that is attached to music as one of the expressive arts within the broad general education, and I think it's an important part of the educational experience of young people that they are able to participate in appropriate music tuition. The Government has taken a number of decisions in this respect in relation to our own budgets. The Government, under the direction of my colleague Fiona Hislop, has reinforced funding for a number of key elements of the financial support we make available for music tuition and appreciation within Scotland, with support for the music budgets that relate to the Youth Music Initiative, the National Orchestras, to Expo and Creative Scotland, all of which the Culture Secretary Fiona Hislop has maintained as budget commitments because of the importance we attach to music tuition within Scotland. There are some local authorities in the country who do not charge at all for music tuition, and I am absolutely certain that after the budget process is completed in local authorities, there will still be many local authorities in Scotland that do not charge for music tuition whatsoever, and I would encourage Midlothian Council to reflect on that position. I also think that the Midlothian Council could reflect constructively on the conclusion of the Education Committee of this Parliament, which said that the committee respects the democratic right of local authorities to take decisions about local expenditure and acknowledge the financial choices they face. However, the committee believes in principle that music tuition should be provided free of charge in every local authority, and I would encourage Midlothian Council to reflect on that conclusion, which was agreed across the political spectrum in this Parliament.
Liz Smith.
Thank you. Could I ask the Deputy First Minister whether he agrees with another of the findings of the Education Committees, and I quote, "There is a complete lack of clarity over whether instrumental music tuition undertaken for SQA exams can be legitimately subject to charging." And can he explain what the Scottish Government is going to do about this situation?
Deputy First Minister.
I don't think there's any dubiety in the guidance that's available. I don't think there's any whatsoever. But the committee has raised a concern that there might be, in which circumstance I will look very carefully at it. There is one scheme, again in Midlothian, which troubles me greatly, where the local authority essentially puts the obligation onto the exercises an administrative charge on the school. But obviously, for a school to be able to exercise free choice there, they have got to have sufficient budgetary control to exercise that. And I think that does stretch the spirit of the guidance, which I think is crystal clear on this question. But the committee has raised that issue, and I will explore it. But as I stand here today, I think there's no dubiety about that point.
Alec Rowley.
Presiding Officer, in the current financial year, 17.5 secondary schools are having to cut £2 million directly from their budgets. Parent councils have written to myself and to the Deputy First Minister on that. The reality is that Fife and many other local authorities are clear that they will have to cut further for their education budgets next year. Is it not time that we had a degree of honesty around the cuts taking place to local councils and actually have to have a discussion on how we're going to solve those cuts rather than blaming councils when we vote through those cuts?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, I think I know Alec Rowley's in quite a difficult position on this because his party didn't exactly engage on any aspect of the budget process, and least of all some of the ideas that Alec Rowley himself put forward. But I think in Fife, Fife Council's spending power has increased in this budget settlement by over 5.8%. So Fife Council has got to take certain decisions. But I come back to one of my answers to Christine Graham. Local authorities today in Scotland, a number of them, do not exercise any charge or apply any charge for music tuition. So there are choices that are made at local level by individual local authorities, and when the spending power of Fife Council is increasing by 5.8%, I think it's up to Fife Council to look in that enhanced resource environment how they deploy the resources available to them.
Question number 5, Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Deputy First Minister what categories of public sector workers will be exempt from the proposed workplace parking levy.
Deputy First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the Government has expressed support for a willingness to develop an agreed amendment with the Green Party to the Transport Scotland Bill to create a discretionary power for local authorities to introduce such a levy. This is contingent on the exclusion of hospitals and NHS properties. Further discussion on the content of that amendment is underway at the present moment, and there will of course be further dialogue with the committee and further dialogue with individual local authorities should they choose to take such an approach.
Murdo Fraser.
I thank the Deputy First Minister for that response. In exchanges earlier, he claimed this was a policy about localism, but the Scottish Government have already decreed from the centre that NHS workers will be exempt, quite rightly in my view, but not teachers, police officers, local government workers or other public or even private sector workers who might be lower paid. So can the Deputy First Minister tell us, how can teachers who are currently considering the pay offer from the Scottish Government take a proper view on that offer and what it means for their take-home pay when they do not presently know if they might be facing a £400 a year additional tax charge for parking at their places of work?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, from somebody who voted against the budget and against the provision of any public funding to local authorities whatsoever, it is a bit rich for Murdo Fraser to come here and make a claim about teachers' pay. If Murdo Fraser has had his way, there will be no money available on the 1st of April for our public services, and that is a dereliction of duty by the Conservative Party in this Parliament. We will take forward the agreements that we have reached with the Green Party. They will be subject to dialogue and consultation within this Parliament, and of course, if accepted, it will be up to individual councils to determine whether they wish to take forward such a provision. But for Murdo Fraser to come here with crocodile tears about teachers' pay when he's an advocate of localism demonstrates the hypocrisy of the Conservative Party.
Andy Whiteman.
The Deputy First Minister will know that powers to enable workplace parking levies exist in England. They were introduced by a Labour government, and the Nottingham scheme was implemented by a Labour council. The Liberal Democrats supported such powers in the Transport Act in the Scottish Parliament in 2000. Does the Deputy First Minister agree with me that both these parties appear to be more interested in partisan political point scoring than in working together to tackle pollution, reduce congestion and empower local government?
Deputy First Minister.
I think members of the public could be rightly horrified by the way in which the Conservative, Liberal and Labour parties have abdicated their public responsibility to engage constructively on a budget process upon which public services depend. And Mr Whiteman and I disagree on quite a number of different issues. But I respect Mr Whiteman for the fact that he understands that on the 1st of April, public services need to be funded. We need to collect taxes. We need to make sure the revenues are available to support our nurses, our hospitals, our schools, our public transport networks, our police services, the whole lot. And the Green Party were the only people prepared to engage constructively in that process. So my message to Mr Whiteman is he is right. The Labour Party, the Tories and the Liberal Democrats should be thoroughly ashamed of their appalling abdication of responsibility.
Neil Bivey.
If the workplace parking levy is about encouraging people to use public transport, can the Deputy First Minister confirm why the SNP and the Greens budget will cut support for bus services from £64.2 million to £57.2 million in the coming year, a cut of 10.9% and £7 million?
Deputy First Minister.
But the particular change that Mr Bibby refers to is about a loan scheme that was not used within the Bus Service Operators Grant. But Bus Service Operators Grant remains there as an essential part of the support for local bus services. And of course, the Transport Minister is currently taking through a bill in Parliament which is aimed to strengthen local bus services, and that's exactly what the Government is committed to doing.
Question number 6, Mary Fee.
To ask the Deputy First Minister, in light of it being Children's Mental Health Week, what action the Scottish Government is taking to increase the provision of mental health support for young people. Deputy
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the Programme for Government set out a package of measures to support positive mental health and prevent ill health, backed by £250 million of additional investment. This includes over £60 million in additional school counselling services, supporting 350 counsellors, around £20 million for 250 additional school nurses and 80 additional counsellors in further and higher education. As part of Children's Mental Health Week, we have today announced that we will be producing new guidance on the healthy use of social media and screen time. The guidance will be designed in collaboration with young people and will seek to address some of the issues they face around social media and mental well-being.
Mary Fee.
Can I thank the Deputy First Minister for that response? In a report in December, the Mental Welfare Commission raised concerns about the lack of intensive psychiatric provision for young people, noting that work to explore the issues had stalled. Last year, the number of young people admitted to non-specialist wards rose to 90, and 14 young people were admitted to adult psychiatric care units. Does the Deputy First Minister think that this is acceptable? And what plans does the Government have to increase the nationwide provision of specialist mental health beds for young people, including adolescent IPCUs?
Deputy First Minister.
I think Mary Fee raises an intensely serious issue, and I believe that we've got to make sure that young people receive the support when they have mental health and wellbeing challenges at the earliest possible opportunity of the manifestation of those conditions. For that reason, I think we have to undertake the investment the Government is currently making to strengthen what we might all agree are preventative interventions, because if we do that, we will then minimise, and this is where I come to the specific point that Mary Fee raises with me, the need for acute psychiatric interventions. The earlier we can support young people, the greater will be our chance of reducing the necessity of young people to be admitted to inpatient psychiatric units. So we cannot see these in different compartments. We have to see them as part of the whole strategy, which is exactly what the Minister for Mental Health is focused on delivering. And we will take into account the issues that are raised about acute psychiatric demand. but I would want to stress to Parliament the importance we attach to handling these issues and resolving these issues within an overall preventative approach, which I think will be in the best interest of young people within Scotland.
Thank you very much. And that concludes First Minister's questions. We're going to move on shortly to members' business in the name of Willie Coffey on congratulations to Kilmarnock FC on its 150th anniversary. We'll just take a few moments for, in fact, actually we'll have a short suspension while members change seats and the gallery also has a chance to move and change. A short suspension.
Wherever you stand, get the fresh view of what's happening in Scotland with iScot. Celebrate everything about our country with intelligent, in-depth insight from lifestyle, culture to puzzles, and all the opinions you'll need. Whether it's digital or by post, subscribe now to iScot.
The next item of business is members' business debate on motion 15230 in the name of Willie Coffey on congratulations to Kilmarnock Football Club on its 150th anniversary. And this debate will be concluded without questions being put. May I ask those who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Willie Coffey to open the debate for around 7 minutes, please.
Thanks very much, Presiding Officer, and can I thank MSPs who have signed the motion. I think there's about 29 at the last count. If you're making a contribution, it would be lovely to hear what club you support in Scotland. It adds to the rich colour of the debate today. Presiding Officer, it's with great pleasure and a great deal of pride that I'm able to propose this motion in the Scottish Parliament in 2019 to commemorate and celebrate the 150th anniversary of my beloved Cumbernauld Football Club. I'm fortunate to still have in my possession the wonderful book Go Fame, written for the club's centenary in 1969 by the leading sports author of that day, Hugh Taylor, and I hope to share one or two extracts from it today. As a native of Old Killie and living there all my life, I'm lucky to have also seen the club's 100th and 125th anniversaries. There is something really special when these landmark anniversaries arrive, and they bring the club and the people of the town and wider district ever closer together. And that is so much in evidence already this year. So how did it all begin for Kilmarnock? We know there were young men in the town in the mid-1860s playing cricket and looking for a winter sport to keep themselves amused, basically. This new sport, with the debate about whether it should be played with the hands or no hands, had actually been raging since the 1820s. Eventually, these cricketers joined with the boys from Cumbernauld Academy and adopted this kicking game. What was actually played around the 1860s couldn't have passed for either football or rugby. Their intention seemed to be to have a good time socially, and for those early pioneers, that was all that mattered. The first recorded general meeting called on interested parties who wanted to become members of the Cumbernauld Football Club appeared in the Cumbernauld Standard on Saturday the 2nd of January, and that historic meeting took place 3 days later in Robertson's Temperance Hotel in the town on Tuesday, 5th of January 1869, notified by a young 19-year-old John Wallace, who became the club's first secretary, then president. And so it had begun. Cumbernauld Football Club was officially born. In those wonderful early days, because the rules were, let's say, evolving, and protests were commonplace about the outcome of a game. In one game, the new Ayrshire Association had to remind teams that they couldn't pick their own referee, nor should the referee appear as a 12th man for that team. Some might argue, Presiding Officer, that little has changed since then. As early as 1873, Cumbernauld became one of the 8 founding members of the SFA, along with Queen's Park, Dumbarton and another 13 clubs, put up the money for the first Scottish Cup. Kelly played in what is thought to have been the first ever Scottish Cup match, sadly losing 2-0 to Renton. Interestingly, Renton claimed to be the first World Club champions when, as Scottish Cup winners in 1888, they challenged and beat West Bromwich Albion, who had won the English FA Cup. Scottish players were much sought after by their English counterparts, and the drive to professionalism, still illegal but largely ignored in Scotland, was resisted by Queen's Park, who were supported in this by Kilmarnock. But eventually Kilmarnock became a professional club in 1894 and joined the Scottish Second Division a year later. That early support to retain amateur status had cost Kelly, and it took until 1899 before they were voted into the First Division. Steady, if not spectacular, progress followed, and the club's first major trophy was in 1920 with a 3-2 win over Albion Rovers in the Scottish Cup final at Hampden in front of 95,000 fans. One of the players in the squad, Sandy Higgins, lost his father. Yes, I will, yeah.
Fulton McGregor. Mr McGregor, your microphone's not on.
Sorry.
Ah, there you go.
I was looking for an appropriate time to get an intervention in, and the mention of Albion Rovers allows me to do that. Albion Rovers have got a rich history in the game as well. 1882 that they've been, they were founded, and this is their 100th year playing in the professional league. I wonder if the member will agree with me that clubs like Albion Rovers, who offer so much to the local communities, play such an important role in Scottish life.
Is there anybody else would like to chip in something about their local team before, before Mr Coffey proceeds? Willie Coffey.
Absolutely, Presiding Officer. I congratulate Albion Rovers and all the community-based Scottish football clubs. They're usually very well run and in many cases better run than some of their bigger counterparts. I was just about to say, though, on that fateful day, one of the players in the Kilmarnock squad, Sandy Higgins, he lost his father on the day of the final. Sandy Senior was one of the great early players and was the first Kilmarnock player to play for Scotland. Now, a similar tragedy was to hit our club many years later, Presiding Officer, in 2012, which I'll come to in a moment. A second cup final victory was celebrated just a few years later in 1929, when Kilmarnock beat the cup holders and league champions Rangers 2-0. Interestingly, one of the Kilmarnock heroes that day was our goalkeeper Sam Clemmy, who made save after save and even saved a penalty to keep Kelly in the game. At the celebrations later that night, Big Sam was asked to make a speech, but told the audience he couldn't make speeches, but he could save penalties, to a tumultuous roar from the fans. I was lucky enough to see Sam Clemmy's medal from that day some years ago with my brother Danny and my dad, and I always fondly remember that too. For me, Presiding Officer, as a young boy, the 1960s Kilmarnock team under manager Willie Waddle was a dream. Our first European match was against Eintracht Frankfurt in 1964, and despite losing 3-0 in Germany and losing an early goal at Rugby Park to make it 4-0 for the Germans, Kelly went on to score 5 goals in what was one of the most incredible comebacks in European football. That same season, Kilmarnock and Hearts were fighting it out at the top of the league, and on the last day of the season, 24th of April 1965, we won the championship. Kelly had to beat Hearts at Tynecastle by 2 goals or more to win on goal average, and they did just that. Yes, Bruce?
Would you remind
Bruce Crawford.
Would you remind the Chamber who were in third place on that occasion?
Willie Coffey.
It was Dunfermline, presiding officer. Kilmarnock players Davy Snedden and Brian McElroy scored those vital goals, and a sensational save by Bobby Ferguson in the last few minutes prevented Hearts from grabbing the title at the end, even in defeat. I remember the key moments as though they were yesterday, even although I was only 6 years old and my brother Danny was 10. My dad's response to my worried mother about taking us to such a big game was, "They're going, they might not see it again." He's been right so far, well, up until this season, that is. Real Madrid then breezed into Rugby Park later that year in the European Cup and were lucky to escape with a 2-2 draw. And shortly after, in 1967, Kilmarnock played the magnificent Leeds United team in the semi-final of what is now the Europa League, a stunning period of achievement for the club. It's fair to say that an unspectacular period followed after this, but in 1997, glory returned again, presiding officer, with another Scottish Cup victory at Ibrox on 24th of May, with a 1-0 win against an excellent Falkirk team. To complete that trilogy of Scottish trophies, we had to wait until 2012 to lift the League Cup for the first time, beating Celtic 1-0 at Hampden. That joy and elation soon turned to despair, though, when the news emerged that Kilmarnock player Liam Kelly's dad had collapsed at the game and later died, echoing the very sad and similar circumstances of 1920. Presiding officer, this famous old football club has made a huge contribution to Scottish football and is still going strong. We have some famous people supporting us, from Marie Osmond, whose 70s hit Paper Roses as the club anthem, to Biffy Clyro, who are regular visitors to Rugby Park. And of course we have the award-winning Kilmarnock Pie and Kelly Pie, keeping our fans and visitors happy at Rugby Park. We enjoy a healthy battle for supremacy now with the second team in Ayrshire, Auchinleck Talbot. and we are currently enjoying an amazing period under the magnificent Stevie Clark, with Kelly ending up with most points in the SPFL season in 2018. So to all the talented players and managers, past and present, to the wonderful club officials and staff across the years, and to the incredible supporters of this famous old football club, congratulations, Kelly, on your 150th anniversary. May you enjoy many more successful years ahead, and to Kelly fans the world over, let's never forget that we are Kelly till we die. Thank you.
We move to the open debate. Speeches of 4 minutes, please. Brian Whittle, followed by Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and can I first congratulate Willie Coffey for securing time in the Chamber to debate and to celebrate the 150 years of Kilmarnock Football Club. And I'm more than delighted to contribute to this debate as I have to declare, Presiding Officer, an interest here because I actually coached Kilmarnock Football Club, or was a coach of Kilmarnock Football Club, in the mid-90s when Alex Totten was the manager there, and there were some great names about at that time, like Bobby Williamson, who went on to manage the club to the great Cup win in 1997, to the Gary Holt's, and who was pivotal in that 1997 Cup win, and Monty, who was there. It's great to see him still with a prominent role at the club. Paul Wright was recently into the club at that time when he went on to score the goal that won the cup in the final. So getting to do a little bit of that work with the team at the time was a real privilege, and I have to say, when we're discussing, who you support, my support for football clubs is fairly diluted. Kilmarnock being one of them, but I moved to Kilmarnock to do a bit of coaching in Kilmarnock from Ayr, and as Willie Coffey will testify to, and I discovered at the time, Rangers-Celtic isn't the biggest rivalry in Scottish football. There was a point, I didn't recognise that at the time, and in walking down the street in Ayr, having moved to Kilmarnock, I was reminded of that by several people walking, coming down the street. So, and I have to say that in recognising how fantastically well Kilmarnock are doing this season, and welcome the way that they're doing this season, I also think it's quite intriguing to see that perhaps in the not too distant future that local rivalry with Ayr United, who are doing well in the division below, I think that would be something that would certainly enhance the top tier of football. When I infrequently, I have to say, go along to football matches, but if there's an Ayr-Killy game, that's a game you want to be at. And the last time that I think it was the Cup, maybe happily take an intervention.
Emma Harper.
Intervention. He mentions Ayr and Killy and the rivalry between them, but there is another FITBA team in the southwest, Stranraer Football Club, in the home town of mine, where I used to go to the matches when I was wee. It celebrates its 150th anniversary next year, so I would just like him to comment on that as well.
Yeah, let's get all our constituency football clubs as much as we possibly can. But I just think that I'm going to go on to talk about the importance of football clubs within the communities. But I think that Willie was probably there as well at that game. That when Ayr and Kilmarnock play each other at Rugby Park's full, and I think that those kind of rivalries are things that really galvanise and enhance our community. And to Emma Harper's point, I think what I wanted to say was that football clubs are, generally speaking, very much the heart of the community. And I think Kilmarnock Football Club is a great extol of all of that. And I think that's a model I think others should follow. They have the ability to galvanise a community, have the ability to pull a community together. In terms of what the Kelly Trust are now doing, with the Football Supporters Club Trust are now doing some fantastic work in pulling that community into Kilmarnock Football Club. And they have an all-weather pitch at Kilmarnock. And I went along a couple of summers ago to watch my daughter play in a netball tournament where they'd set out six netball pitches on the Cumbernauld football pitch, and so that ability for the football club to reach out into the community and bring them in, I think it cannot be underestimated. And that, of course, applies across every other club. I had so much more to say, Deputy Presiding Officer, but can I just say I hope that Cumbernauld Football Club will continue to have that influence in the local community, and I think it is a model for others to follow. I congratulate them on reaching the milestone of 150 years, and doing so once again, I'd like to thank Willie Coffey for bringing this debate to the Chamber, and I wish Cumbernauld Football Club every success on and off the pitch going forward. Deputy Presiding Officer.
Kenneth Gibson, followed by Colin Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And as a fellow Ayrshire MSP, I congratulate Willie Coffey on securing this debate, celebrating the longevity and success of Kilmarnock Football Club, Scotland's oldest professional football club. And of course, Ayrshire is the heartland of junior football, and I have 6 junior football clubs in my own constituency. Kelly, of course, have been historically Ayrshire's top team, but after Auchinleck's Talbot's performance at Beechwood Park last month against Ayr United, of course, seeing a junior team win against professional local rivals was momentous, memorable, and really captured the spirit of what Scottish football is about. And I'm sure Kelly fans shed few tears watching long-standing rivals Ayr get put in their place just 2 weeks after Kelly celebrated its 150th anniversary. That rivalry itself was over 100 years old, with the first match between the two sides held in September 1910, the same year that Ayr United were formed. It finished 4 each. Of course, Willie Coffey would argue that it was a dodgy penalty that should have been given in the last minute, but sadly it wasn't. Kilmarnock's story has taken the club far beyond Ayrshire, from its match against Renton in October 1873, the first ever match in the official Scottish Cup, to win the trophy for the first time, beating Albion Rovers in Hampden in 1920, with subsequent successes in 1929 and 1997. So like my own club, St Mirren, they have won the Scottish Cup on 3 occasions. And this Saturday, Kelly face Rangers on home turf in the final 16, and I certainly wish them all the best. Kilmarnock is enjoying a 26th consecutive season in Scotland's top flight and doing brilliantly under Steve Clarke with modest resources. Kelly are one of those select band of clubs to have won all 3 domestic trophies, including the league title in 1965 and League Cup in 2012. And Kelly has enjoyed the international stage, first competing in Europe in the 1964-65 Intercities Fairs Cup, where in their first tie they came from 4-0 down in aggregate, as Willie Coffey has told us with some passion, to score 5 goals and a magnificent performance to defeat Eintracht Frankfurt 5-0. A year later, on aggregate, 5-1 on the night and 5-4 on aggregate. A year later, they held eventual winners of the European Cup that season, Real Madrid 2-1 at home, while in 66-67 they reached the Fairs Cup semi-final. And indeed, if Hibs had knocked out Leeds earlier, there had been 3 Scottish clubs in the quarter-finals of that competition that year. Kelly has played 9 seasons in Europe and further afield, represented Scotland in the New York International Tournament, being runner-up in that 1960 competition. The club's home stadium, Rugby Park, has a history almost as illustrious as the team itself. First used in 1899 during the Second World War, the Army installed large oil storage tanks on the pitch. The club were never compensated for loss of their ground, but after the war, Italian prisoners of war helped extend the North Terrace. Major redevelopment took place in 94-95 and became the 17,889 capacity all-seater stadium we know today. In addition to home matches, Rugby Park was also the venue for 2 Scottish internationals and even an Elton John concert. The success of a club is not just measured on the pitch, of course. Kilmarnock FC's community outreach programmes have brought enormous benefit to the local community. In 2018 alone, Kilmarnock Community Sports Trust delivered 747 football hours to 719 primary children through its schools programme, supported 20 players playing twice a week at walking football, hosted an 8-team Central Scotland tournament at Rugby Park in September, provided 600 meals, football training and nutritional information to 60 young people in collaboration with TAC, Go Football and the Park Hotel, to name but a few achievements. Since its inception in 2015, the Trust has offered a wide variety of programmes to help develop young players and aspire to get active and involved in football, putting community at the heart of the organisation and offering children and young people opportunities otherwise close to them. I hope this aspect of the club's work will prove as long-lasting as the football itself, as it's making a huge difference to many lives. I read with interest Danny Garavelli's column in the Scotsman last weekend, Can Kilmarnock Football Success Revitalise the Town? In it, she has described how manager Steve Clark from Saltcoats, in my constituency, has transformed the team, taking them from bottom to near the top of the Scottish Premier League. This success has breathed new life into the club, with a Muffet stand closed last season due to lack of ticket sales reopened and morale high. The club's upward trajectory is almost in tandem with the fate of the town itself. Presiding officer, Scottish football is all about the fans and communities that support the club and the club that bolsters the community. I'm sure that regardless of the personal allegiances of members across the chamber, they will join me in saying that Kilmarnock FC makes an invaluable contribution to the social fabric of Ayrshire and Scotland as a whole. As much as football sometimes divides us, it's a power to unite us in victory and defeat, in seeing the underdog win the day and in watching heroes triumph. I congratulate Kilmarnock FC on their success over the last 150 years and look forward to see them going on to even greater heights.
Colin Smith, followed by John Finney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's a privilege to join with other members in celebrating Kilmarnock Football Club's 150th anniversary, and I thank Willie Coffey for securing today's debate. Whilst we might not break out into a joint chorus of paper roses at a time of debates on Brexit and budgets with our fair share of disagreements, it's good to be taking part in a debate with such refreshing, unanimous cross-party support. I was asked at the weekend by a constituent what I'd be speaking on in the Chamber this week, and I explained the various debates and statements, including this one. He said to me, "Why are you talking about Kilmarnock Football Club?" So I said to him, well, this is roughly what I'm going to say. See what you think. I said, Kilmarnock Football Club isn't just any football club. It's Scotland's oldest professional club, celebrating its 150th anniversary. A club who were one of the first teams to take part in Association Football's second oldest tournament, the Scottish Cup, back in 1873. A tournament they won in 1920, followed by a second success in 1929, when they beat Rangers 2-0 in front of over 114,000 people at Hampden Park, before completing a hat-trick of Scottish Cup wins in 1997. In 1965, Willie Waddell led Killie to the then top-tier First Division Championship. And just 7 years ago, the club defied the pundits by winning the League Cup against Celtic. And maybe most importantly of all, Kilmarnock have won the Ayrshire Cup 42 times. Now, that's not to say there haven't been lean times. I remember in the 1980s watching Killie play in Division 2, but I have a confession to make. I was there cheering on my local team, Queen of the South, as a Doonhamer, who celebrate, I have to say, a centenary this year. But it's 26 years now since Tommy Burns led Kilmarnock back into football's top flight, where they've stayed ever since. And now they sit proudly near the top, even flirting with the top spot recently under Stevie Clarke's leadership, all despite having a budget a fraction of the size of the old firm. There really is a buzz about the club today, and crowds are growing as more and more people head to Rugby Park on a Saturday. Bill Shankly once said, "Football without fans is nothing." And, Presiding Officer, it's the Kelly fans, a growing number, who are at the very heart of Kilmarnock Football Club as they celebrate their 150th anniversary. Not least, of course, through the establishment recently of the Kelly Trust in 2003 to bring supporters closer to the club. In 2017, they launched the Trust in Kelly initiative, and supporters from around the world pledged a remarkable £100,000 to buy unallocated shares in Kelly and put a supporter on the board of the club as a full and equal director. In May last year, that new director was appointed, giving fans a voice at the club's decision-making table. That director, of course, will be familiar to many members in this Parliament. It is, of course, Cathy Jamieson, the former member of the Scottish Parliament for Carrick, Cumnock and Doon Valley, and former Member of Parliament for Kilmarnock and Loudon. Cathy is already making a huge impact, leading the way in improving communication between the club and fans, and working with other directors, Billy Bowie and Phyllis McLeish, to develop Kilmarnock as a real, true community club. The Kelly Trust itself are building on the success of the Trust in Kelly campaign, generating more funds for the club, looking at how those funds can be invested for the benefit of fans. Kilmarnock FC are setting an example across football where fans don't just follow their club, they lead the club. So fitting as supporters celebrate the 150 proud years. Presiding Officer, I began my comments by saying a constituent asked me why I was talking about Kilmarnock FC in Parliament, and I've just told the Chamber roughly what I said to him. You're probably wondering what his reply was. Well, unfortunately, he said, "Well, I still don't understand why you're debating Kilmarnock Football Club." I have to tell you, it was an advice surgery in Ayr where I made those comments, and he did confess he was an Ayr United fan. Presiding Officer, congratulations to the players, directors, staff and supporters of Kilmarnock Football Club in your 150th year. Thank you.
John Finney, followed by George Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I, on behalf of the Scottish Green Party, congratulate Kilmarnock Football Club, our nation's oldest professional club, on this significant milestone, and thank Willie Coffey for bringing this motion here. Now, Willie said at the outset he would like to, I'd like to hear which club you support. Well, for the avoidance of any doubt, I referred people to my register of interests and my many associations with Heart of Midlothian Football Club, which inevitably leads me to talk about something that Willie's already alluded to, season 1964-65. Goals average, the one and only time it happened. I think it must have been devised by Stuart Stevenson. It's quite a mathematical setup. Goals scored divided by goals conceded, and Kilmarnock had to win 2-0. Winning 3-1 or 4-2 wouldn't have done it. Now, I'll not go into the figures, but 38,000 people were there to see it. I wasn't one of them. And, of course.
Kenneth Gibson.
Upsetting is it the fact that if goal average had been used in 1986, Hearts would have won the title that year they lost to Dundee on the last game. And if goal difference had been used in 1965, they'd have won the title that year. So they'd have switched the actual systems round. Hearts would now have 2 more league titles than it currently has.
John Finney, can I say I'm at a complete loss here, so I'm just going to have to explain this all to me later. John Finney.
Well, Presiding Officer, if I can help, the intervention from the member was not meant to be of a therapeutic nature, let me put it that way. If I had issues before about such matters, I'll certainly have to reflect them now. But 0.04 of a goal, 0.04 of a goal. Now, I was actually going to come on to say that people say time's a healer. Well, 86 in Dens Park would certainly prove that not to be the the case. But there's good news from 64-65, because I'm delighted that the member took an intervention from Bruce Crawford there. Dunfermline did end up 3. The good news is the gruesome twosome were nowhere to be seen. They were away down the league. That win friends and influence people. Because I have to say, I don't think our national sport is helped by the duopoly. I would say that there's a significant camaraderie among fans out with that, and that's healthy. Now, I often get asked, how does a native of Lochaber, born and bred in the Highlands, come to support the Hearts and get chided for not supporting my local team? I do support my local team. My local team is Lochaber Camanachd from Speanbridge, and Scotland's other national sport, Shinty. But of course, I'm very keen to lend support to both Inverness, Caledonian, Thistle and Ross County, and hope they'll do well. My father was a Hearts fan, and the generation on generation thing is very important. My grandson now being primarily a Barcelona and a Hearts fan. An identity with the club, and the identity of the club with the community, and vice versa, is very important. Now, I fondly recall Kilmarnock's win in 1997, and fondly recall the celebrations in the wonderfully named John Finney Street. I mean, that's the bus stop celebrations there. And again, 2012, and the emotion that's been alluded to, and won't dwell on, but the mixed emotions and the sadness associated with that. Now, I've enjoyed my visits to Rugby Park, some good games, certainly good pies, and as has been said, Kilmarnock have been a breath of fresh air of late, and I would, there was reflections on Eintracht Frankfurt. That's a famous name, and that's a very famous game that was alluded to there, and I'm sure many would like to see the European nights back at Rugby Park. I know that non-football fans, and I might be surrounded with them in this part of the chamber, have no comprehension of issues, of the nuances. But it's a wonderful game. It's a wonderful way of bringing people together. And the dark days endured, these cold, wet days, and the glory nights savoured in the hope of repeating. I was 42 years of age before I had a glory day in 1998. Now, Kilmarnock have a proud and a contribution that they've made to Scottish football, and that's continuing with our beautiful game. And I want to see them enjoy a long and healthy future, entertaining the rest of us. And at the end of the day, what's point? Nothing full of a go between friends. Thank
you. The last two contributions in the open debate, George Adam, followed by Graham Simpson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I thank Willie Coffey for bringing this debate to the Parliament and congratulate Kilmarnock FC on their 150th anniversary. I was just noting there that I can't believe I wore a blue suit on the day we're having this debate, you know, because normally it would be black and white being my colours, and part of the reason is, I've maybe not mentioned this before, Presiding Officer, but I'm a St Mirren supporter, and in 2017 we were 140 years old, and we will probably join Kelly in 8 years' time as 150 years old. And I think one of the big things about this debate has the importance of football to our nation. Not only is it our national sport, but these clubs are the heart and soul of many of the communities that we live in. I think as politicians, we should actually look at that and embrace that a wee bit more than what we currently do, because I think they could maybe help us in many of the things that we are currently looking at in this place, and we should maybe embrace them on that side of things as well. But you might be surprised, Presiding Officer, that I actually do some research for some of these speeches, and while I was doing research, I found out that Kilmarnock in 1887 to 1890, their strip was black and white stripes with black shorts and black socks. Now, that sounds like a perfect colour scheme that they should have kept as time went on. At the same time, St Mirren were wearing a black and white strip. We had blue, ironically, shorts and blue socks. And when you look at it, there's many things that connect St Mirren and Kilmarnock. Not so much the fact that when Morton and Ayr aren't in the same division, it's our nerdy game, it's our derby game that we get, because it's just a quick drive down the road. And at this point, I'd like to apologise to Willie Coffey for various Adam family soirees in Kilmarnock at Nerdy, where the New Year's parties have continued. You know, you might have started your club in the Temperance Hotel in Kilmarnock. That's a foreign word to some of my family members in the past. But when you look at how St Mirren and Kilmarnock have actually played with each other, Killie are winning at the moment, 87 to 84 at St Mirren. So it's roughly about 50-50 really, you know, isn't it? But there's a connection with the fact that the current manager, Stevie Clark, has actually started his career at St Mirren Football Club before going on to Chelsea. Yes, will do.
Brian Whittle.
Thank you for taking intervention. We also recognise the connection between Kilmarnock and St Mirren, and they have the same sprint coach over a period of time there as well.
Yes, I was rather disappointed that you bragged about the time that you worked, Mr Whittle, in Ayrshire, and you didn't talk about the time when you graded up to the mighty St Mirren, you know, and you became the sprint coach for them. But the clubs have actually both, as already been said, won the Scottish Cup 3 times and the League Cup once. And although Kilmarnock are Scotland's oldest professional club, they're not a founder member of the Scottish Football League, because unlike St Mirren, you know, on the 30th of April 1890, there were two clubs from Paisley, Abercorn being one of which my great-great-grandfather actually played centre-half for them, and along the other clubs that were there that are still in business currently were St Mirren, Dumbarton, Hearts and Celtic. You know, and there are a few others from that season that are no longer with us. But Kilmarnock were founder members of something called the Scottish Football Alliance, which later, which seems quite strange, and Ayr, which became Ayr United, and Morton were part of that early league as well before they all ended up in the Scottish divisions. So I think when we look at history of football, it's quite fascinating when you look at it, because basically, as Willie Coffey already mentioned, football and rugby, at the very beginning of the clubs, there were actually the rules weren't there, and some games that we would look at now, we would think they were rugby games. You know, both our clubs started as what you'd probably recognise as a rugby club, hence the reason Kilmarnock still call their ground Rugby Park. And when you look at it now, that we've since 1877, St Mirren have been playing football, but were in 1876 originally a football team as well. I was looking at some of the things that actually came up in the same year that Kilmarnock were formed. Ulysses S. Grant was sworn in as the president of the United States, and University of Oxford won the very first boat race. So it shows you everything else that was happening in the world while we were just kicking a ball about a field. You know, but when you look at the history of football, you've got to remember there's other people involved in our great game as well. And another Kilmarnock boy was Hugh McIlvanney, who recently left us all. He did his apprenticeship as a journalist in the Kilmarnock Standard. And he once said of Newcastle United in his typical kind of wit, people talk of Newcastle United as a sleeping giant. They last won the championship in 1927 and the FA Cup in 1955. They already make Rip Van Winkle look like a catnapper. So, presiding officer, perhaps since both of our teams, Willie Coffey and I, have actually won a tournament a lot sooner than the Newcastle United, perhaps our teams are currently just having a catnap and the glory days are just beyond the horizon.
Graham Simpson.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. Can I also congratulate Willie Coffey for having this debate. I was looking at his motion, and it was one of the longest motions I've ever read, actually. It seemed to be the entire history of Kilmarnock FC. Certainly all the high points were in there. We almost don't need to have the debate, but I'm glad we have, because we've discovered that Brian Whittle is both a Kilmarnock and St Mirren reject. Now, I'm not a Killie fan. I'm not a Killie fan. I'm a Celtic fan. But I do have a soft spot for Kilmarnock. Mrs Simpson also has a soft spot for them because Kilmarnock is the only away ground she's ever been to in Scotland. And I know how to treat her. And it's there we both discovered and fell in love with the Killie pie. It was a cold Sunday morning, and it tasted absolutely fantastic. Presiding Officer, there's only one special one in football, in my eyes, and it's not the former Chelsea and Man United manager. Now, it used to be very easy in those days for Old Firm fans to get tickets to go to Kilmarnock. You could just phone them up, or you could just turn up, and you could get in. Motherwell were in the same boat. Sadly, those days are gone, so it's much more difficult for people like me to go to grounds like Kilmarnock, and that's a shame. It was a very open and welcoming club. I remember one of Killie's many managers, Bobby Williamson. He also encouraged easy access. He would allow phone calls from fans. He would take phone calls from fans to explain tactics and team selection, etc. It was a bit of a character, was Williamson. While he was Hibs manager, his silver Mercedes was clocked doing 107 miles per hour on the M74 near Lockerbie. He was found guilty of speeding and banned for 3 months. But his fame as a soccer boss sadly did not extend to Constable Jane Monteith. She said after the car was flagged down, Williamson was invited into the back of the police car and asked to give his details, and she told the court He was polite initially, but then said we should really appreciate who he was and could we settle the matter at the side of the road. He kept saying we should know who he was, but I didn't know who he was. And in 150 years, you do go through a few gaffers. There have been Tommy Burns, who left for Celtic, Alex Totten, Jim Jeffries, Kenny Shields, and right up to the present day, Steve Clarke. Now, I do like Steve Clarke. He impresses me and he amuses me at the same time. I think under that dour exterior, there's a bit of a comedian somewhere. But he's doing a fantastic job. And if they can finish second this season, I will be delighted. Kilmarnock collected more points over the course of 2018 than any other team in the Premiership. Great stuff. Steve has given the players back their self-belief, says Sandy Armour, who's the editor of the club fanzine, The Killie Hippo. Why is it called the Hippo? I've absolutely no idea, but it sounds funny. Maybe somebody knows. No. Killie fans have plenty to be cheerful about as they celebrate their 150th anniversary and notch up a few more victories over Rangers, especially this Saturday, and we can all be very happy. Now, I was reading, like Kenny Gibson at the weekend, how the team's current success is giving a feel-good factor to the town. And that's fantastic, because when I worked in newspapers, it seemed all you ever read about Kilmarnock was a story about this, the scheme star, or that, the scheme star. Marvin's new teeth, paid for by the Scottish Sun, stood out as particularly ridiculous. Onthank has never, in my view, been representative of Kilmarnock. The feel-good factor has even seen a boost for the Hard Luck tattoo shop, which may now have to change its name. So Killie's first 150 years has been up and down. Let's hope the next 150 can see them continuing on their current upward trajectory, just so long as they're not too successful.
Before I call the Minister, I've realised that if we really wish to hear from him, we'll need to extend the debate for up to half an hour under Rule 8.14.3. I now invite Willie Coffey to move a motion without notice.
Could I move that motion, Presiding Officer?
Thank you. The question is that the debate be extended by up to 30 minutes. Are we all agreed? We are. That is agreed. And I now call the Minister for around 7 minutes, please, Mr Day.
Indeed, Presiding Officer, I'm not going to take half an hour. Let me begin by congratulating Willie Coffey, not just for securing this debate, but for what was a smashing speech and one of a number that we've heard. As a supporter of a Scottish club that's only been around for 116 years, let me acknowledge the achievement of Kilmarnock reaching its 150th anniversary and marking that by enjoying a season to remember. Albeit, as an Aberdeen fan, I do hope the season ends with the Dons being ahead of Killie as they currently are. Presiding Officer, football is Scotland's national game. It's in our DNA. It can be a source of great banter. The fortunes of our clubs can have a major impact on our weekend. On and off field activity dominates media and social media and discussion in communities. Indeed, Presiding Officer, it has on occasion been known to feature in Facebook interaction between myself and Mr Coffey. And on the subject of the friendly rivalry and banter that John Finney referenced, it was great to hear substantial contributions today from supporters of St Mirren, Hearts, Queen of the South and Celtic. But I do have to say that the passing mentions secured for Albion Rovers, Dunfermline and Stranraer bordered on the shameless. I also noted Brian Whittle's diplomatic contribution describing his loyalties as diluted, and Kenny Gibson getting through 4 minutes without showing his hand. Scottish football, Presiding Officer, has its challenges, and we are working with clubs, the football authorities and other stakeholders to address these. But it remains a hugely important and generally positive influence on the day-to-day lives of Scots. Whilst our men's national team may not be as successful as once it was, and our club sides are no longer feared across Europe, Scotland's women have reached the Euros 2 years ago, and this year will contest the World Cup finals, a remarkable achievement. And domestically, our game remains strong. With a top-flight
that sees just 11 points covering the top 4 sides and the championship even more keenly contested, there is a competitiveness afoot which can only be good for the sport. Attendance has remained high, the highest per capita in Europe, and interest is as powerful as ever. So there's much to celebrate, much to discuss, as we've heard that, and we've heard that reflected in contributions from members this afternoon. As I noted earlier, and others have, this debate to mark the 150th anniversary of Kilmarnock FC could not be better timed, given the fantastic progress which has been achieved under the leadership of Steve Clarke. The club, despite relatively modest resources, is performing magnificently near the top of the table and is currently involved in an exciting tussle for the title. It's been a thrilling season so far, and I do hope Killie continue to keep up this pace for the remainder of the campaign. However, Presiding Officer, as a Government Minister, I'm of course required to not knowingly mislead Parliament. Therefore, let me say that my personal hope is pretty much the same as Graham Simpson's, and that's to see Killie finish runners-up in the league, albeit behind Aberdeen. However unlikely that scenario might be, especially after last night. To be serious though, Presiding Officer, let's recognise, as others have, the history and the standing of the Rugby Park side within the Scottish game. It is the oldest professional football club in Scotland, one of the founding members of the SFA, and it took part in what is thought to have been the first ever Scottish Cup fixture in 1873. I was half expecting Stuart Stephen to be in the chamber to tell us that he'd had a relative taking part in that game or claiming to have been there. The club joined the Scottish League in 1895 and was elected to the top flight for the first time in 1899. In 1920, as Willie Coffey observed, Kilmarnock won the Scottish Cup, and that was followed soon by a second success in 1929, when Rangers were memorably beaten at Hampden in front of a 114,708 strong crowd, as Colin Smith noted. The club, of course, won the Scottish Cup for a third time in 1997, and its most recent honour was the League Cup when Celtic were defeated in 2012. However, and with apologies to John Finney, because I don't want to intrude particularly on his personal grief, the greatest moment in Killie's history was, of course, when the club won the top flight title in 1964-65. It was, as we've heard, a dramatic title race with Hearts 3 points clear in the days of 2 points for a win with 2 games remaining. The clubs went head-to-head on that final day of the season, and Kilmarnock won 2-0 to claim the championship. The club, as again we've heard, has also made its mark in Europe, qualifying for European competition on 9 occasions, and its finest hour being reached in the semi-finals of the 66-67 Fairs Cup, only to be defeated by Leeds United. Killie are, of course, one of only a few Scottish clubs to have played in all 3 European competitions. Now, as others have noted, like all SPFL clubs and many other football sides in Scotland, Kilmarnock is associated with a trust which fulfils an important community role. The Scottish Government greatly values the work undertaken in communities using the power of football to inspire the delivery of wider outcomes. This work is the main focus of our engagement with football through individual organisations as well as representative of national bodies like the SPFL Trust and the Scottish FA. Established in 2015, the Kilmarnock Community Sports Trust is a charitable organisation which aims to support the local community. Working with local people from the age of 3 and upwards, the Trust offers a wide variety of programmes to assist in developing younger players and help them aspire to get active and involved in football. Presiding Officer, in conclusion.
John Finney.
And would absolutely concur with his comments about trusts. I wonder if he would agree with me that fan ownership is a way of building on that and building the community further closer to the club.
Graham Day.
I absolutely agree with that point. I think the more that fans are involved in the running of their football clubs, the better. But as I said, Presiding Officer, to conclude, let me congratulate Mr Coffey again on securing this debate, and of course I'd like to congratulate Kilmarnock on its 150th anniversary and wish it almost every success on and off the field in this historic season. Presiding Officer.
That concludes the debate on congratulations to Kilmarnock Football Club on its 150th anniversary, and the meeting is adjourned until 2:30.
Wherever you stand, get the fresh view of what's happening in Scotland with iScot. Celebrate everything about our country with intelligent, in-depth insight from lifestyle, culture to puzzles. And all the opinions you'll need, whether it's digital or by post. Subscribe now to iScot.
Well, it's lovely to be out on such a sunny evening in Edinburgh, but it's a shame that we have to be out tonight protesting against the two-child cap and the rate clause. Well more than a year since Alison Thulis, my colleague at Westminster, first spotted it in the small print of a Tory budget.
Very glad to see such a huge demonstration today and so many people still coming along 1 year after the rate clause came into force to show their opposition to this vile and despicable policy. The UK government have never been able to justify this policy, and we saw that this week with Esther McVeigh's pathetic attempts to say that the rate clause was somehow double support for women and that gives them some kind of chance to talk about the most appalling and disturbing experience of their life.
As you can see behind me, we're at the very beginning of the All Under One Banner rally. You can obviously hear the pipers behind me as events are about to kick off.
It's time to aim high, look resolutely outwards, and never, ever accept second best. Above all, it's time to believe that we can. We can build that better country we know is possible. And friends, we will.
If you enjoy watching our programmes, please help us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster by signing up to become a Broadcasting Scotland supporter.